hot. Today's video is brought to you by Squam Lake Inn in Holderness, New Hampshire. Not actually a sponsor, but a delightful little B&B should you ever have the opportunity to drop by New Hampshire. So one year I had a student named Jackson, and he would sit in the back of my class. This is just a couple days into class. And I could tell just a few days into the year that he had a difficult time making relationships with his peers and also with his teachers. It was pretty obvious. And a classmate was sitting a couple seats in front of him and said, "Mr. Alpert, Jackson just called me stupid." And then a couple minutes later, another student from across the room said, "Mr. Alpert, Jackson just threw something at me." And it was clear that I needed to have a private conversation with Jackson. So I got everybody busy working and I called Jackson up, and I see him kind of saunter up to the front of the room and wearing this big hoodie and this baseball hat. And he sort of has a glazed over look in his eyes like, "Okay, I've done this 1,000 times every year. I'm ready for my lecture. What do you want to say to me?" And I look at Jackson and I look at his hat and I say, "Jackson, the Padres? Really? I would have thought you were more of a Giants guy." And in that moment, he kind of shook out of his preconceived glaze of what he thought was going to happen and said, well, I mean, I do like the Giants. I just kind of prefer this hat." And over the next maybe 90 seconds, we have a conversation about baseball and a couple favorite players and a couple other things. And then I quietly say, "Hey, Jackson, can you do me a favor? On your way back to your seat, can you apologize to your classmate and also just try not to call out and call students' names anymore?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, okay." Wandered back to his seat, and that was the only problem I ever had with Jackson that particular day. Now, that's not to say that I never had any issues with Jackson the rest of the year. We certainly had our ups and downs at different times, but I will say making a lot of little deposits into the relational bank account like that paid dividends throughout the year, and me being able to build a connection with Jackson that really benefited both of us in the entire class, but really helped Jackson to grow throughout the year. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, how to build strong connections with individual students. Now, last month, if you'll recall, we talked about the importance of school connectedness and how to start off the year on a relational foot and how important that is. And we defined school connectedness as a student's belief that school staff care about their academic and individual well-being. We also talked about how school connectedness has been shown to decrease instances of substance abuse and violence amongst students, as well as decrease emotional distress and thoughts of suicide, and increase things like grades, attendance rates, graduation rates, a whole host of positive impacts. And these are just some of the reasons why it's so important for students to remain connected to school. And research has shown time and time again that a relationship with one positive adult in the building can be enough to generate some of these positive benefits. Now, of course, there's a whole host of things that teachers can do at a classroom level to make spaces that are inviting and welcoming and safe to students, and we'll talk about those in future videos, but today we're going to be talking all about the individual connection one-on-one with specific students. Now, the American Psychological Association has a list of strategies on how to build resilient relationships with students, and a lot of them focus on being safe and responsive, but one in particular really caught my eye. And they recommend knowing and demonstrating knowledge about individual students' backgrounds, interests, emotional strengths, and academic levels. And taking the time to develop these relationships, especially in early years, is really critical. Studies have shown that when students are able to build positive relationships with teachers in kindergarten, they don't lose that skill. They're also able to build those relationships with teachers in as grades as high as 8th grade. Now, we'll never know causation versus correlation, but the stakes are kind of high. The more that we can build those positive relationships with students early on, they should be able to be durable and last throughout their school career. But let's get really practical for a moment. For me, the tip of the iceberg when getting to know students is all about asking questions and paying attention. As I noted before, I always kind of make a mental note about what students are wearing, like if they're wearing some jersey or hat of a sports team, or a band, or referencing some movie or video game. I pay attention when students are talking in class and try to overhear what movies they're talking about, or video games or shows. And you can also tell a lot by how they decorate their binders and their backpacks and that sort of thing. In a few minutes, we're going to hear from two teachers about how they very strategically kind of dive deep into these topics and really use these interests to build relationships with students, but we're not going to jump into that just yet. Because I want to note that what if a student isn't wearing obvious things that give away what they're interested in, or what if they don't talk about what they like very much? What if they're pretty introverted? One of my favorite questions is simply asking any student, specifically on a Monday or a Tuesday of the week, did you do anything epically awesome or incredibly boring over the weekend, or something in between? It's kind of an antidote to the classic situation when you say, "What did you do this weekend?" And they just say nothing. It doesn't let them off the hook there. It's like it was either awesome, it was boring, or it was somewhere in between. What do you got? And then you can ask more questions, diving deeper and deeper based on that starting point. And the trick is to use these little pieces of information and sort of build on them and show students that you remember having those conversations and following up. So if you have a student that had a big softball tournament coming up, well, the weekend after it, when you get to school, don't wait for them to bring it up. Ask them, "Hey, how was your softball tournament? I was wondering how that went." Or if you know a group of students, we're going to have an epic video game weekend, ask them, "Hey, how did that turn out? Did you guys have a lot of fun or not?" You can be the one to continue building that relationship by asking questions over the long haul. Now, obviously, these tactics just barely scratch the surface on really building quality relationships with students. Fortunately, we have 2 videos from a couple amazing teachers. They're going to share how they go way beyond these first couple steps in getting to know their students. Now, spoiler alert, there are going to be a couple things in these videos that require some additional effort on behalf of the teacher. And I know that we're all pressed for time and plate spinners and have so many things going on at once already. But you'll see that with very, very little time investment, I think you can make some moves that can really, really go a long way towards making students feel welcome in your classroom and hopefully improving their academic experience as well. First, we're going to hear from Hayden McClay, a secondary teacher who uses media like music and movies to build relationships with students. He's someone who is deeply, deeply passionate about music himself, and he's not shy about sharing his passion with students and also asking about their passions about music or other things and really connecting with students in those domains. I personally taught alongside Hayden for years and saw him in action and can attest that he is expert level when it comes to building relationships with students, specifically in doing so while maintaining very, very high expectations for all of his kids. And finally, we'll hear from Corey Coleman, who has long since worked with neurodiverse students. As an administrator, I worked with Corey as she managed a small program that supported autistic students and also supported gen ed teachers in helping to build relationships with students. And some of the strategies that she provides are priceless and I think could be used by any teacher in any circumstance with any student. So without further ado, here are my conversations with Hayden McClay and Corey Coleman. How has music been a way of building relationship for you with students? Does that happen?
Yeah, generally I'll ask them, kind of have like a paper bag. I think a lot of teachers have the same sort of building connections. They bring a paper bag to class. We did it digitally this year, but 5 things that describe you. And I always mention music. And I don't say they have to. It's not a requirement because, again, when you're learning about a student, you shouldn't put limitations on them, but it's always in the example.
Yeah.
And they usually will talk about it. And
what do you put in your example? I'm curious. Because you did one for yourself, right?
Yeah, so I did board games, and then I talked about how much I love Beyonce in Lemonade, the album. That's a whole different podcast, that album. Talk about someone really putting themselves out there in a just horrible situation that she was in between her and her husband, and then they got through it. I mean, that takes courage. That's not fake courage. That's real courage. One of my favorite albums. Anyway, but I put in Beyonce's Lemonade and talked about how much I love Beyonce. And then I had a girl that did make me a Beyonce shirt, but because of the pandemic, she hasn't given it to me yet. But it just says something silly, and it's like in glitter or something for Beyonce. And that sort of vulnerability with students to admit that you love a certain artist that may seem like it's not masculine or it's not feminine.
A little
yeah.
bit, yeah.
Like
you've got tattoos and everything else.
I've been over that for so long. Yeah. I mean, I don't
Beyonce.
care how people perceive me.
Yeah.
So for students, is music always ends up being like a really immersive experience. So someone told me to check out the new J. Cole album. Not a fan. Not on Kendrick Lamar's level, first of all. Not many people are. There are some songs on there where like Lil Baby's guest rap is incredible. Love that song. But I'm just not it just doesn't feel like my kind of rap. Yeah. But I listened to it and then I talked to him. I said, I liked it. It was okay. I like this song with Lil Baby, and that's his favorite song. So then we were able to talk a little bit. And that student in particular was being a little bit sort of lackadaisical with his work. And since that conversation, will he turn in missing assignments that are blank? Yes, he will. However, when I say it's blank, he always fills it out. Before he wasn't. He just would ignore me saying, hey, buddy, it's blank. Could you fill it out?
Right.
A girl I was struggling with last year, the one that said that she would maybe make me a Beyonce shirt, we didn't really see eye to eye at the beginning of the year. Again, she said I was kind of coming off as sort of brutally honest, and it made her uncomfortable. And so the Beyonce thing, she said, kind of like helped. It's like, okay, he's not just trying to get us through the content. No, he's asking us to have evidence. Like there's a person there that cares about us and music. And for me, it's usually music. That musical component gets me relationships. And I'm also not afraid to say my opinion, but I always say, in my opinion, not a fan of Lady Gaga. Just not a fan. Is she an incredibly talented singer? Yes, she is. Does she make good albums, in my opinion? No, she does not. Is she on Beyonce's level? No, she's not. Is she on Taylor Swift's level? No, she's not. So I think it's playful to, is she better than Katy Perry? Yes. But so those sort of things, like, I'll say. I'm just focusing on like female pop stars.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But we have those conversations, and are they long? Usually not.
Yeah.
They're short. Yeah.
But they make little connections that are, I mean, I think it communicates a couple of things. I think it communicates to students that you're not, students sometimes have a perception of teachers that we're not like actually human, right? That we like, you live in the classroom and you exist just to teach your specific content area. You know, a lot of times if they see you at the store or outside the building, their heads will kind of explode because they're like, oh, wait, you're not in the context I need to see you in.
Right.
And then also, especially when you're kind of transcending what they perceive probably subconsciously to be generational boundaries, right? Like you actually can relate to a lot of the, or at least not at least, I mean, it's a big thing. We'll take the time to listen to music and stuff like that at their recommendation. I think that communicates a lot to them.
Certain thing. But yeah, I think you have to have a working knowledge of music to engage. And you shouldn't fake it. So if you're not super knowledgeable about music, then why don't you just ask your students for a list?
Yeah.
Hey, make it appropriate. I like to hang out with my grandma or my mom on the weekend, and we listen to music. Make it appropriate, whatever, and then rock out with it on the weekend. I think they'd be more than willing to give you suggestions.
Oh man, they'd be so stoked. And I think too,
and you're making a connection with them then.
Yeah, if you follow up as well. I mean, I've told this story a couple times, but I remember in high school, I off the cuff had told a teacher about a super obscure movie that I had just seen and really liked and stuff. And he, over the weekend, watched it with his wife and then came back on Monday and was like, yeah, I liked this about it. I liked this about it. And it blew my mind that an adult had taken the time in his personal life to do something in my recommendation, and then followed up. Like, clearly I still remember it, and this was 30 years ago, and so would they be willing to? Absolutely. And if they do it, make sure that you actually listen to it and then follow up. And it's a huge relation. So, you had said that, you had the student that Paul, we'll call him, that we were talking about previously, and he, was looking maybe checked out or distracted in social studies class, but then he came to you and he was telling you about it because he trusted you, right? So he was able to articulate his thoughts and bring things out because he was talking to someone that he trusted. And you obviously have more time with your students, and with most of your students you have for multiple years. But I'm curious if you have some examples or tips for gen ed teachers where you've seen gen ed teachers in the year that they have a student, hopefully earlier in the year, be able to build a relationship with some of your students so that they trust them and see, maybe not to the degree that they see it with you, but they see some of that come out and are able to communicate and thrive a little bit more in their classroom than they might otherwise. So I guess another way to frame that is, what are some ways that gen ed teachers can build trust with autistic students that enables those students to do better than average in their classrooms?
Well, we all kind of have that knowledge of like the neurodiverse brain, or an autistic person usually has a subject that they are either very well versed in, or that is their favorite thing to think about, or their favorite game to play. So I could give you an example of, like, here is someone who loves space and is paying attention to every rocket launch and understands all of that. Well, it would be easy for you to go to this student and say, was there a rocket launch? And then the student would tell you in detail about the rocket launch. That would be one level. That student knows that you know that he likes rockets. But to actually gain trust and to build even more of a relationship, you need to get your own knowledge about that subject. And it could, I know, like put more things on for teachers to do, but it could literally be a quick Google search of, I don't know, rocket boosters or something that is related to that student. And if you come to them with, oh my gosh, I just heard that Elon Musk is going to do this, that, or the other, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute. That student's thinking, this teacher is interested in the same things that I am interested in. Therefore, this is a person that I could talk to. They're not just asking me questions and asking me to perform or give them all the answers because, you know, I am the smartest person about SpaceX. And they're not trying to take something from me. They're interested too, and we're the same. And I learned that from an autistic adult who talked about kids and video games. And he's like, you know, everybody is all about like, get this kid off this video game. They've got to get off this video game. That's all they ever want to do. And I tell them if they don't do X, Y, and Z, they're not going to be able to do their video game. And I'm not going to let them have video games. And we've talked about that before, is that we all are seeking comfort. We're all seeking predictability. And with an autistic, a neurodiverse brain, an autistic brain, that's even more an issue. That's more important because nerve endings and sensory inputs can be, depending on the student, can be exaggerated. And so wanting to feel safe and comfortable and in control and in an expected environment is just an internal need. And that's what video games can give you, is control of your environment, expected environment, all of those things. Nothing that they don't know is going to happen because they've researched it all. And the advice was, play that game with your student. Sit down, pull up a chair, get a controller, understand the game, play together. Let the student teach you and you learn it. Not knowing about that video game or not knowing about the actual rockets and space launch is like an insult, really, to this child when you then want them to pontificate on it or tell you all about it. So they will because they love it, but it's not the same as you knowing. Because now you're in it together. And I had a mom start playing Minecraft, and she was like, this is amazing.
It's a game changer.
It's a game changer because then they see the draw. And what happens is that all of a sudden you've built this relationship and the controller goes down. And when you ask, do you want to go to the zoo today? Then the child or the student is like, yeah, I want to go with you. You know, just like I can get kids to do things that gen ed teachers can't get them to do because they know that I know them and they know that I have similar things in my thought bubble. Like we have the same things in our thought bubble because I've done my research.
Interesting. So kind of from a practical level, it's kind of like, you know, you said level one is kind of asking, you know, was there a launch recently? You know, level two is maybe researching. There was a launch. It was last week, and then this is the name of the rocket. Did you watch it? Right, and then so that kind of opens the door a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then level three is like actually, you know, in the case of a video game or something, taking the time to play that game or to watch that show or to learn about, you know, something specific.
Yeah. It was like power too. It was like I can influence other people.
Correct.
Without having, well, in the case of some of my students, without having to yell and scream and kick.
Yeah.
Or withdraw.
Right.
Like that a teacher could do something because they know me and they want to be part of my life. They want to be part of my thought bubble. They want that. And, you know, we all love to have somebody come up to us and say, hey, you know, you told me about XYZ show and I watch it. Oh my gosh, it's so great. You know?
Well, and also, people might say that you're in a unique situation because you have a small classroom with a limited number of students. And I'm thinking back to the video game example. And I know I would see on Fridays that you guys would play Super Smash Bros. And you recently told me about you guys playing Among Us, which is a cool game. So a practical question, there might be some situations. I know some schools are like 0 devices, 0 games, that sort of thing. And then other schools have like advisories on Friday, and maybe they have a free advisory day or something, and they have 15 minutes where they let students play games in class. I'm wondering what level of removing boundaries and dedicated time with a student it would take to build that level of trust. So if you have, an advisory class, let's say, where there's 20 kids in it and you're playing games for 15 minutes, if a teacher just saddled up next to one of your students and said, hey, can we play this game together for 5 minutes? It doesn't have to be this big drawn out thing. Or can you show me this game? Can you show me about it? Talk to me about it. Would that kind of help build that bridge?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I hope you found that information helpful, if nothing else than helping to brainstorm ways that you can continue to build high quality relationships with students in your classrooms. Thanks so much for joining, folks, and we will see you next month.